Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by a New York Times best-selling author and Emmy Award-winning television writer. His television writing credits include Seinfeld, Ellen, The New Adventures of Old Christine, and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. His most recent novel, coming out actually next Tuesday, is The Murder Show. That's right, it's your favorite writer and mine, Matt Goldman. Matt, how the heck are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Robert. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're obviously going to be getting to the new book, but for people just to have a little bit of a good, I guess, visual representation, can you hold up the copy of the new book for
Yes.
people to see? There it is, The Murder Show. So we're going to be talking more about that, of course. And as I mentioned to you in the green room, kind of boying out just any connection to Seinfeld because in middle school, high school, that was the show.
Yeah.
So, but before we talk about that, like obviously you were doing this TV writing previous. I mean, like what was the very first creative thing that you ended up doing? Do you remember like around what age? Like, because
Y-
I always say that, being like not everybody wants to, well, a lot of people always say like, oh, I always have these book ideas, but no one actually ever sits down or, writes out a book or writes out a story.
Right.
Like at what point, I mean, what happened to you to really kind of set you on this course where you ended up working in TV and then writing novels?
Well, I there were a couple of steps. The first one was, and I never talk about this, but I was in a band in high school and we played original material. And I worked with some very talented people who have gone on to have careers in the music world. And I think that's when I realized that feeling you have like when you're a kid playing in your basement, making stuff up, like something can happen with that. And because our band did play out at real clubs when I was 15 years old. We would play and then they would kick us out. But we played with alongside some very good bands, some famous bands, and I think that lit the fire in me. I did not think that was something I would do with my life or any creative field professionally. But when I was in college as a chemistry major, thinking I was going to go to medical school, the end of my junior year, some friends invited me to see stand-up comedy live, which I had never seen. This is 1983. I'd seen it on TV. I'd watched Letterman and Carson quite religiously, but I'd never seen it live. And for some reason that I can't explain to this day, when I saw it live, I thought I should be doing that. And that really started my writing career because I was writing material for myself. And I loved the writing part far more than being on stage. It went well for me. I started working, getting paid gigs pretty quickly. And, and, but it was the writing part I loved. So when I could afford to drop the performance part, I just started writing full time as a TV writer.
So, well, just going back real quick. So, what instrument
Yeah,
were you playing in the band?
bass.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had you learned to play any other instruments or it was just bass?
I had taken piano lessons as a kid. I was in band. I played trumpet. And so I knew a little bit about music. And for lack of a better word, we were a punk band. So it was a pretty simple stuff we played. It had to be, we played fast. So it took actually more physical stamina than musicality, at least for my parts. But uh but originals, and that was a really fun thing to be a part of.
Yeah. So,
And we played
where were you?
alongside the replacements um and actually I left to go to college uh outside of the state. The original four members stayed. They just ended up playing my bass part on the keyboard, and they opened for U2 in 1981. So so
Are you still
it
in
was
contact?
it was a real band. Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, some of them. And then our drummer, who was very smart, left one summer to go to Cornell at some like genius camp. And his brother filled in for us. His brother was Dan Wilson, who has gone on to be a multi-Grammy. He had a band called Semisonic that did very well.
Hmm.
And then he's gone on to write and co-write so many Grammy-winning songs, including someone like you with Adele. Um, and Jimmy Harry, our guitar player, has turned into a big time producer. Uh, I was around some talented people. I was not one of them
Do
musically,
you,
not compared to them. Yeah,
yeah, do you still play at all? Like you just kind of, strum some stuff on the bass?
not so much. During the pandemic when we were all housebound, I got a mandolin and started playing that, which I really love. I love classical music. And a mandolin is basically a violin with frets and no bow. So I was able to play a lot of Bach and Mozart and things I love, uh, uh, violin pieces. But mandolin, there's a lot of mandolin people who do that. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So, getting into TV is not easy. I mean, getting into a lot of
Right.
different industries is not easy. Did you like what was the thing to break in? Sometimes people just know people who know people and kind of help them. Sometimes it's just really, I mean, I know a lot of famous people start out as like pages for, these like Nate,
Right.
like, these like late night shows, or they are assistants or whatever else. I mean, like, what were you doing as you were writing? And at that point, like, what specifically were you writing? Were you writing like television scripts? Because I know that sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes people who want to be like TV writers, they write kind of spec scripts of other
Yeah.
shows to show
That's
that
ex
they can understand kind of the format and the structure and characters and all of that.
that's exactly what I did. My in was stand up. Before I left Minneapolis, I had opened for Dana Carvey, Bob
Wait, so
Saget.
you were doing stand up yourself?
I was doing stand up. Yeah,
Oh,
I
wow,
wrote,
amazing.
yeah, no, I was a performer and I opened for Dana Carvey and Bob Saget and Jerry Seinfeld and Dennis Miller and Roseanne Barr and a whole bunch of people. And they were really encouraging. They're like, you should be out in LA writing. You'll do okay. You'll do well. So when I was 24, I moved out there and I did start picking up work right away. Little odd jobs like punching up game show pilots and writing sketches for a Saturday morning kids show. And there were these little jobs. I was 24 years old, but I got in. And then my big break was when I opened for Jerry in Minneapolis, we became friends. We stayed friends. Uh, we were in touch. And when he got the show, he asked me to come work on it. When that happened, I was somewhat ready for it because I had written probably 8 spec scripts by then. And so the people at the studio and the network had to approve me, and I had those writing samples. And so that they got me in the door. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but I,
So,
but Jerry, that was my lucky Jerry.
so what season did you come in? Was it the second season?
The the very first season, they had made a pilot
Right.
without the Elaine character.
Yeah, the Seinfeld Chronicles.
Well, yeah, yes, the first 4 were called the Seinfeld Chronicles. Bef After that pilot, I still to this day don't know how it all happened, but they had made a pilot. NBC passed. They did not pick it up, and then something happened. There's rumors that Fox said they would take it. Anyway, NBC said, we'll give you 4 more. It was like a springtime thing. And we did, that's when I came in and we did 4 episodes. Those 4 episodes led to the next full season. Yeah.
And how long did you stay on the show?
About 2 years.
Okay.
So, um, and the reason I went to the Larry and Jerry, and they, and rightfully so, did almost everything. I mean, I
Yeah.
did write one and a half scripts. I did contribute other things that weren't in my script, but there was not a writer's room, which was unusual for a comedy, and I wanted to be in a different kind of environment. And so I went and worked on a different show that was not nearly as good, but I was in editing and casting and set design meetings because in television the writers are the producers.
Yeah.
So uh, so I learned a ton more.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually you mentioned Dana Carvey. I was just listening to Dana Carvey and David Spade's Fly on the Wall,
Uh-huh.
podcast, and they were interviewing Carol Leifer.
Yeah.
And she talked about how it was very almost like SNL, where you would just go in and just pitch ideas to Larry and
Yeah.
Jerry, and certain ideas would stick, and they're like, "Yeah, we'll come back to that," or stuff like that. So which yeah, man, I know the first episode or the first season is one of those because it's so like early that
Yeah.
certain episodes kind of stick in my head or not. But like, which episode could you point out and be like, that was basically mostly me?
The robbery, which is an episode. It was the third of those Seinfeld Chronicle episodes. Jerry returned on the broken into. He's had it with that place. George is a real estate agent then and says, I got a great place to show you. Uh, it's right on the park. They go see it. And then George wants it too. He likes it so much.
Ah, yes, I
And
remember this one. Yes,
yeah,
yes, 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 yes.
so then, and Elaine is invested because she's going to take Jerry's apartment. Kramer's responsible for being broken into because he was watching The Bold and the Beautiful and he left the door open. Uh, and so he's out there looking for Jerry's stuff.
So
So
is this, and I'm trying to remember because I remember like the first episode or two, like obviously Seinfeld was very famous for all the different storylines converging.
yeah,
But like I want to say like initially for the first episode or two, that wasn't really the case, right?
it
Like,
was
but
more
like
that it
this,
was a
but
little
your
bit
episode sounds
longer
like
than that.
everything did kind of converge and it all. And
People
sorry, Matt, you kind of keep freezing up. I don't know
people
how
forget
how it's
that
on
about
my end.
Seinfeld, that those early episodes, good. What's happening with me? The
Sometimes you're freezing up, but now you look
oh,
okay. But so I don't
okay.
know. Okay, yeah.
I don't. All right. Um, People forget in those early episodes that the stories were small and simple. They
Hmm.
were waiting for a table at a Chinese restaurant. They were
Oh
looking
yeah.
for a car in a parking garage.
Hmm.
They were all kind of in the same story, and you would get to know their characters in one story. Once you knew those characters and were you just wanted to see those characters, they could go off in different directions, and you were with them. You were still uh, with them, invested in them, to the point where one character, George, could lie to a woman and tell her he's a marine biologist. And another character, Kramer, could be hitting golf balls into the ocean, and one lands in a whale's spout and it washes up right on shore.
Were you there for that
I was
episode?
not there for that,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
it illustrates the point, which is once you know the characters, you can go big and broad,
Yeah.
and your audience will stay with you.
Yeah. Oh, and the only
So,
reason I ask is because I know that that monologue that Jason Alexander does, they did it like off the cuff. It wasn't the original
the
ending
sea
that they
was
were planning on
angry.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
so
and
at
it was a
that
very,
time,
yeah.
so
Go,
at that time, were you like, when did you start kind of, having that bug that, oh, maybe I want to write a novel or maybe some short stories? I mean, were you doing anything else besides TV writing or
no,
at
because
that
they
time?
kept me so busy. I had always wanted to write books. I it was then. and still is my favorite medium. I just find that relationship between author and reader, even though they probably will never meet, just very intimate. And and I had always aspired to do it. But in television, they keep you very busy, they pay you well, and I just didn't have time. It wasn't until much later uh, that I made the attempt. And it's really because television comedy was changing in a direction I didn't want to go. Uh, when shows like The Sopranos and The Wire and Breaking Bad and House of Cards became they just created the second golden age of television. And television became very cool all of a sudden. It had kind of always been in Hollywood, you want to work in film. If you can't work in film, then you work in TV. But those shows changed that. And but they were all dramas. And the powers that be in comedy and the networks and the studios thought, we want to make comedy cool. But comedy is not a cool thing. If you look at the great comedic characters going all the way back to the Honeymooners, Ralph Cramden, not a cool guy, or Lucille Ball, she's not cool. Fraser Crane, George Costanza, they're idiots. They're idiots, but we love them because they reflect our human flaws. I mean, they say Seinfeld is a show about nothing, but I think Seinfeld is a show about selfishness. Those are the most selfish characters on the planet. We all understand the impulses that drive their behavior. That's how
Yeah.
that very specific show, not only is it New York, it's Upper West Side. Not only is it Upper West Side, it's pretty Jewish. But it has the most universal appeal of any show I've worked on because it's about something we all experience, which is selfishness. Most of us have the good sense not to act on those selfish impulses. Those characters did, which is what makes it so funny.
Yeah.
Um,
And and
and
and and in the same respect, I think that's probably what makes It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia a show that has lasted so long as well,
yeah,
because it deals with those same. I mean, again, you talk about selfish characters. In fact, I would say the gang from It's Always Sunny is probably
yeah,
even more
they
selfish
probably even
than
are.
the Seinfeld
Yeah,
gang. But it's the same thing too. And again, I mean, I've probably watched the show throughout the decades now so many times that I mean, they hold up so well. Yes, some
they
are
do.
old, but just the stories themselves are, in a way, like you said, it's universal. Just because it's like people deal with this stuff all the time, like trying to avoid other people because you had like an awkward experience. Like it wasn't stuff that you were seeing in like Home Improvement or any of those other shows that
No,
were just
and a lot of them came from real life. Larry David did quit in a huff at Saturday Night Live and then went back the next day and pretended like nothing happened, like he didn't. Um, one of the episodes I co-wrote with those guys, The Stranded, when George talks Jerry and Elaine into going to a party with him out on Long Island and
oh
then
yeah.
meets a woman and leaves and they're stuck there. That really happened to me. It happened in California, but it was before we had cell phones and there were no Uber and we didn't have any money. And a buddy wanted me. We lived in Studio City. He talked me into going to a party in Santa Monica. He met a woman and left with her, and he drove. I didn't have enough money for a cab to get home. I didn't have a cell phone. There was no. I had to just kind of like go around and introduce myself to people and see if anyone lived by me. I mean, it's like a lot of those stories. I think the Soup Nazi. It's all based on real stuff.
Yeah.
A
And
lot
your
of them were.
episode with the Michael Chiklis was in that one then too.
Yes,
And
yes.
that was he still on the commish at that point? I mean, that was before he transitioned into the Shield.
I think it was definitely before the Shield.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
hard for me to remember the order of events.
Yeah, I know. So,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right. I mean, so at that time though, were you having ideas? I mean, your very first novel, the Nil, is it Nils Shapiro? It was Gone. Well, let's talk about Gone to
Gone to
Dust.
Dust.
Is that your
Yes.
first published novel or your first like novel that you wrote?
That is my first published novel. I had written one before that. just wasn't any good. An agent wanted it, but nothing happened with it. And then uh Gone to Dust was my first attempt at a crime novel, and I wrote it quite quickly because I only had a window of time to do it in. I was still quite busy with television. And yeah, and that book changed my life. So
So can you talk at all about the first novel? Was that also a crime novel, or like what type of genre would you say it
no,
was?
it was a domestic, a, I don't even know what you'd call it. Uh, a, it was an attempt at domestic literary fiction, I guess. It was, and a lot of the feedback I remember getting at the time, which is no one wants to read these kind of books if they're written by men. Um, so,
Yeah,
so, and I went, oh well. So, but I knew I, I guess the greatest thing I knew about that is it demystified the novel a little bit. 300 blank pages are intimidating, and to complete something and have an agent like it, and that was all good. So
yeah.
uh so it
So the
gave
agent did
me,
shop that around. I mean, it was shop to
oh yeah, it
publishers.
was
Yeah.
shopped. Yeah.
Okay. Did you so so what were you reading at that point? Like, were you reading a lot of crime thrillers, or I mean, or were you reading
I
literary? Was there a prefer? I mean, when you had the time, because I'm sure even working in TV, there was a
it
lot
was
of
all literary. And when they tried to make comedy more cool, it got slicker and jokier and less human. And so I thought, I think I want to work in drama because that's all I'm watching. And to do my homework for drama, that's when I really started reading crime fiction because I thought I'm going to end up working on a cop show or something. So, but when I started reading crime fiction, I found what I was missing in a way, because when you have a crime at the center of your story, dead body, missing person, there's kind of a built-in engine to the story, which frees up some time for your characters to just be people. They don't have to carry the whole weight of everything because the phone's going to ring and someone's going to say, "We got the prints off the gun," or whatever happens that pushes it forward. And it really resonated with me that, oh, now there's some space to focus on the characters as people. And so I kind of devoured the genre for 3 years, and I had this window, this 4 month window between television shows, which is kind of rare that you're going to have a job in 4 months. So so I just sat down and started writing with a serious story, but with narrated with my comedic voice that I'd developed over decades of working in comedy. And that's where Gone to Dust came from.
and this is the first book in a series. As of right now, there are four books in total. Did you know at
Yeah,
that point that this was going to be a first book in the series, or was it initially just like this is a standalone?
I
I could probably do more if I needed to, but it just stands alone as
I
it is.
hoped it would be. I mean, I did create the supporting characters with rich enough lives, I thought, with enough dynamics between them that we would want to see them, Nils and the people around him, go to the next case. That was my hope. And fortunately, when Forge read Gone to Dust, they said, "Yeah, we think this is a series." And so the initial deal was a two-book deal.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, um, is it safe to assume that having worked in TV may have helped when you were then kind of transitioning to novels? I mean, at least because, like, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're writing these TV scripts. They had to be very tight in, I mean, especially back then in networks, because things had to
Yeah.
be like what, 22 minutes.
When I
So like you
started, it
had to
was
fit in
22. Yeah.
and it had to have a certain structure. And so then coming then to writing novels, did that help like with that structure? Well, first of all, let me ask you this. Like, what were you reading? What type of crime books were you reading that you were finding inspiration from at that time? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, hardly original, but Chandler quite a bit. But also Joe Nesbo, the Norwegian
Hmm.
crime fiction writer. Um, uh, I read Farrell Coleman, who's now a friend, but I really liked his Mo Prager and then later his Gus Murphy books. Uh, I later Anthony Horowitz, because we come from a similar background, as far as having worked in television. And uh, I can't remember everything I read back then. I mean, I know inspired me along the way in my
Yeah,
journey as a
sure, sure.
writer. Tana French, Kate Atkinson, uh, but also I read a lot of like Michael Connolly,
Yeah.
Harlan Coben.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and I always hate the terms, but I always have to use it because people know what it means. But like, would you say you're one of the like more of a plotter, pantser, or is it kind of a combination of
total
each?
pantser.
Really,
No,
even
I'm a
coming from
real
TV, because in TV it has to be pretty well structured, correct? You have to
which
kind of
is how
outline
I,
the.
which is why I know outlines don't work. I've worked on over 500 episodes of television. And listen, anybody, I'm not knocking anybody who writes an outline. Whatever anyone's process is their process. Uh, 500, over 500 episodes of television. We always had to have an outline. It always went through 100 drafts by the time it was approved by networks and studios. The network would, I mean, the writer of the episode would take that outline, go away, write a script that's faithful to that outline, and the script would stink every single time almost. It was really a rare exception when that didn't happen. And I think that's because the parts of our brain we use to make an outline is very logical. This happens, this happens, this happens. It all kind of makes sense from an overview. But if you create three-dimensional characters who behave like real people and behave consistently, they don't fit into those stories very much. And so
Mm,
whenever a character says in a book or a movie or TV show, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's because they're usually acting out a character to fit that outline.
yeah.
I like to develop from the inside out, let it be a little messy, but
Oh,
I
you
wouldn't be
froze
able to
up.
do it that way if I hadn't worked on so many episodes of television.
Yeah, sorry, you froze up there for a second.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
I mean I totally agree with you. I'm one too to I'm not a fan of outlining. Mostly because, like I said, and again, nothing again, like you said, nothing against for some writers, it works
Right.
great, and that's great. For me, it's mostly when you're outlining, you as the author are really kind of directing these characters to do what you want, as opposed to I feel like when you sit down and just start going, those characters are basically telling you or
That
letting you know what needs to happen next.
that's a
That isn't
good
to
way
say,
of
now, I don't
saying
know
it.
about you, like and you mentioned Harlan Coben. I always use that Harlan Coben, like where like he usually knows where he's going to go. Like he knows like it's
Right.
like a cross country trip. He knows where he's starting. He knows where he's going to end
Yeah.
up. What happens along the way, how he gets there. He has
Yeah.
no idea, and that obviously is subject to change. But he typically, I mean, so the same for you. I mean, when you sat down, like with the Nils Shapiro, I mean, did you have just that character in mind? Did you know what the overall story was going to be? Maybe how the ending was going to be, and or did
I
something?
knew two things. I knew I was going to write in my voice for him, which I did, and the book starts when a woman is found murdered in her home, and the body and most of her house is covered in the dust and dirt of hundreds of vacuum cleaner bags. And the reason the killer did that is because there's so much in all that vacuum cleaner dust, there's so many hair and DNA and fiber samples. It makes it almost impossible to isolate a killer's DNA in that forensic heap of garbage. It made the crime not solvable in the lab. That's all I knew. So, uh, and I did that for a very specific purpose. And set the book where I did set it in Edina, Minnesota, which is a real place, which at the time had not had a murder in decades. So there was an inexperienced police force that brought in a consultant, a private detective who's Nils, and that was my way of introducing him to the story and to the reader.
What kind of research were you doing, if any? I mean, are you someone who likes to do a lot of research, or you kind of have the mindset that you don't want the research to get in the way?
I have the mindset that I don't want the research to get in the way. That said, I don't want it to be wrong.
Right. Oh,
So
absolutely. Absolutely.
so I do what I have to do and I put as little of it in as I can get away with. So uh I just don't want it to be wrong, and that's not that I haven't made a mistake or two over the books, but I try to get it right. And it is also the reason I don't write police procedure because I have a, if you get it wrong, you're going to
Yeah.
hear it. Most, people like Michael Connolly, who was a beat reporter covering the police for a long time, he knows his stuff. He has great sources. Uh, and so, but when things come up, I do research them to try to get it right.
Yeah. Now those Shapiro books are written in first person.
Hmm.
Um, and a few of your other books, I was looking, from what I can tell, Still Waters and A Good Family are written in third. And I think The Murder Show is too, like, but
Yeah.
one of your other standalones, well,
Carolina
actually, and we can talk more
Moonset.
about, I'm sorry?
Carolina Moonset is written in
Yes,
first.
Carol Musa. So is that, are there times where you second guess how you want to tell the story, or do you typically in your gut know, okay, this is going to be written first, this has to be written in third? Um,
I Well, the Nils books I knew were first. Carolina Moonset, I started to write it in third, and I just felt it worked better in first. So after a couple of chapters, I switched. I went back and rewrote those in first. Um, A Good Family is really the first time I have a woman protagonist, and I didn't feel comfortable writing her in first. I write her in a very close third. Uh, and then with both Still Waters and The Murder Show, I have two strong points of view. So it felt I had to write that in third, both of those.
yeah. So going back to the Shapiro books, did you, obviously so far there's been four in the
Right,
series. How many, I mean, how many more books do you feel like, I mean, sometimes with series, some writers might say like, you know what, as of right now, I think I could probably do another book or two. Some writers are like, I could keep this going forever. I could do 20, 30 books. I mean, like, well, I guess the question is this. Do you do kind of a Robert Crace where the characters are not really ever going to age, despite the
right,
fact that you have like the very first Robert Crace novel, they're using payphones, and now,
right.
Elvis Cole
I
is
know.
using a cell
It's
phone,
like
but
The
essentially he's still
Simpsons.
the same age that he was then. I'm like, or like, are these characters, are they aging as the series goes?
They age in real time. And to answer your first question, I feel like I could write Nils forever. Uh, so I made him 15 years younger than I am. Uh, to give that a chance. So, uh, but I can write a lot. I think I could write a lot in Nils books. Yeah,
And so Carolina Moonset, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's probably, at least looking at Amazon with like the
yeah,
ratings or
yeah.
whatever, is that like your most successful book to date?
It is my most successful book to date. Yeah,
And why would you,
and
and specifically, and again, I know we had a kind of a brief conversation at BoucherCon
yeah,
last year about this, but why would you say, what about that book do you feel kind of really struck a chord with readers?
it's about a middle-aged guy who is taking care of his father who has dementia. Not on a regular basis. He's just doing it for a couple weeks while he's visiting. But I think that just captured a lot of people on an emotional level, and so that that has been my most successful book. Probably Gone to Dust second, but that first. And so when my publisher asked me to try a standalone after Ford Mills books, and then Carolina Moonset became my most successful book. So they didn't. They wanted me to keep writing standalones. And I did that. I have done that. I did put Nils in 3 chapters of the murder show without telling them. I just put him in there. He has a minor role. And so, but they were fine with it. They liked it. So it was fun to write him again. And it is the number one request I get from readers through email at book events. When's Nils coming back? And I have written a fifth Nils book now that will be
Okay.
coming out in December. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Can you share
Yeah.
the title or you want to hold off on that?
No, the title is Dark Humor,
Okay.
and it's I kind of got caught in a no man's land with Nils because my editor at Forge from the first 8 books and all the Nils books all the way through to the murder show left Forge, made a friendly move to Minotaur, so still in the Macmillan family. Asked me to go with her. I did. So now Forge doesn't want a Nils book because I'm gone. And Minotaur wants new things from me, which I understand. So I had to find a different publisher for Nils, which
Mm.
my agent, I give her the credit she did. Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about the murder show. I have some other
Yeah.
questions about other stuff, but let's talk about the murder show because you said that Nils shows up in the murder show, but I'm assuming I don't like no spoilers, but those novels are written in first person, and obviously murder show is mostly
Right.
written in third person. So when we see him, are we seeing him from like a third person point of view? Like I guess the question is, we're not really seeing him like internally, right? We're seeing him like from like
Correct.
a secondary character or something like coming in.
He's written in the third person with interacting with one of our main protagonists in the book. And then we also see him on his own in his personal life a little bit, but it is third person.
Okay, very good. And then, so what can you tell us about the murder show? If you want to hold up the book again for people to see what that looks like,
Yes,
then too.
it's right here.
There you go.
The
And
murder
then, what is
show,
the tagline there?
truth is deadlier than fiction.
And is that something that you know what I mean? Like, was that a publisher idea to put that on the cover, or is that something you
Honestly,
came up
I
with?
can't remember who came
Yeah.
up with that, if it was
Okay.
me or them. Um, I've written 4 books since this, even though it's not out yet. So that's why I get confused about those things. But um, the show is about a television showrunner, a creator showrunner, and which is something I know about. And he has a show called The Murder Show on one of the streaming services. It's been on 3 years. Its ratings are getting worse. He goes in and pitches a fourth season. They don't like it. They say, come back with something better or we're canceling the show. He's 40 years old. This doesn't sound old to normal people, but in show business, 40 is getting up there for a writer. And he feels like if he doesn't have his own show on the air, he's too old to go work on someone else's show. Nobody wants a 40-year-old hanging around if it was a show that was created by a 30-year-old. And so he feels kind of a desperation because it's all he knows how to do. He's trying to come up with a better fourth season when the Writers Guild strike happens. This is all backstory. So the book starts with him going home to Minnesota to regroup there during the strike to try to come up with this uh, better storyline for the fourth season. He runs into his old high school friend, Rosalie Greenman, who is now a Minneapolis police officer. Ethan and Ro were best friends in high school. They had a third friend, Ricky, who the summer after they graduated on a trip to the cabin was killed by a hit and run driver. No one ever came forward. It was never solved. They don't know if he was hit on purpose or it was an accident. Ro now believes through her police work that there's a series of things that have happened spread out over the 5-state area, and she thinks Ricky was murdered. she can't get any traction with law enforcement. It's happened outside Minneapolis, so it's not her jurisdiction. Nobody wants to investigate it. She feels some guilt over Ricky's death, and she talks Ethan into helping her investigate Ricky's death under the guise like you can use this for your show. Like this could be the idea. You could get something from this. So he doesn't really think that's going to happen. He's a little bit more interested in Roe romantically than investigating with her. But the more they find out, the deeper they get into it, uh, there's definitely something there. And so it gets a little dark and twisty as they try to figure out who killed Ricky.
Yeah. Yeah. So with just writing in general, like you said, you've
Hmm.
written 6 books since then. Um, how how many books would you say you, I mean, obviously you've published, I guess, as of right now, one a year in the past several years. Like what like how many books do you typically write in a year?
Well, I now know that I can, I write 80,000 word books. They're not gigantic. They're not skinny, but they're not huge. I think 3 books a year is about good for me. I could do. Um,
Wow.
I have 3 books coming out in 2026.
Wow.
Um, and so uh, 2 is very comfortable. I treat it like a real job, and I think that is from being a television writer. It's what I
Yeah.
do. It's just my job. And so even if you only write 1,000 words a day, and I do it 7 days a week because I don't outline and I need to keep that story going for myself. I don't want to fall out of the story or then I have to track back in, which is hard. So, but even if you write 1,000 words a day, for 3 months, that's 90,000 words.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'll have a bad, but I usually write more than that, but I will also have a bad day. That happens, or I get stuck.
Now,
But I just try to stick with it.
yeah, do you ever run into, I mean, again, one of the pitfalls about really not outlining is there are times where you might take, you might be writing in a direction you think is where it should go, and then 5, 10 chapters or more into it, you're like,
Yeah,
ooh, I, t
I
I took a wrong turn.
yeah. For I don't get that far down the wrong road. I will do a chapter usually and realize, oh, that's not right. I gotta back it up and go a different way. But again, I really think working on all those episodes of television, because it wasn't just like, oh, we have a story. It was a one-line idea. Take a one-line idea to a one-page idea. Several drafts of all this. Take a one page to an outline. Take an outline to script. Many drafts of outline and script. Take that to the table, hear the actors read it, start rewriting again. Go to the first rehearsal where they're up on their feet in the set, rewrite it again. Rewrite it again in the editing room. Like we're rewriting it while we shoot it. All of that, I have developed a sense of story where I can feel where I can when I'm getting off in the wrong direction, usually.
Yeah.
So I I usually don't go too far down the wrong road. That said, I have written whole novels and then just shelved them. It's
Hmm.
happened twice.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So do you do a very kind of like a Nora Roberts vomit draft where you want that first draft just to get out, or are you going back and kind of editing the day before's work so that you have a more cleaner, manuscript when you get to the end?
Kind of a combination. Um, I know some writers who go back to the beginning every day. I don't know how they do that, but they do. I kind of go straight forward. I have 3 documents open. I don't use any special software. I have one document is my manuscript. One document, I keep a journal for every single book I write, and then I have a to-do list. So, like, I might get a third of the way into the book and say, okay, now this is happening. So, remember to go back and change this thing in chapter 2. So, but I don't usually go back right then and do it. So
So wait, the journal, is that like for like a character guide type thing,
that
or like what do
that
you typically use for the
that's
journal?
just me thinking, kind of typing out loud, just like I'm feeling good about this. I'm feeling this doesn't work. Here's a problem I have. I tried, maybe I should try to fix it this way, and then I'll write another paragraph, or here's another way I could go. Or so it's just kind of my process.
Yeah.
I think my greatest skill as a writer is I'm a fast typer. Um, and so I can just think it and then see it in front, right in front of me. There's no, I don't, it's so, there's no conscious effort to type anymore. It just happens. So I don't know if I hope that's not my greatest skill, but it is an asset.
So what has your ratio been so far in terms of titles that, you have your heart set on versus the publisher's like, no, we need to call it something else.
Well, the first two books, they changed my titles. And I didn't know if I could push back. I regret not pushing back on both of them. Gone to Dust is a perfectly fine title, but the original title was Dirtbag, which is a way better title. The reason they wanted to change it is because Nils, my private eye, is not a dirtbag. He's not a
Hmm.
womanizer. He's not a heavy drinker. And they thought people would think he's the dirtbag, which I get, but it's still a better title. Like if you see a book on a shelf called Dirtbag, I think you want to pick it up. Um, and Broken Ice, my next book, which much of it takes place in a real town called War Road, Minnesota, which is up on the Canadian border, was originally called War Road. And I just think that's a better title than Broken Ice. But I
Yeah.
didn't fight back. Since then, the titles have mostly gone my way. Um, they have liked the titles I've come up with, and uh, and so that's been it's been okay. But those first two I do regret. Yeah.
Yeah. So having worked in TV so long, are you able to watch TV nowadays and enjoy it, or is like part of your
That's a
brain very much kind of like analyzing the shows, being like, ah, they shouldn't have gone that direction? You know what I mean?
that's a really good question, because the answer is no, I am not able to watch much and enjoy it. When I find a show where usually it's just I see the building blocks and I go, I know exactly where this is going, and it goes there. Because that's the only reason they would put that scene in. Um, and so there's a couple shows a year that just I get lost in them, and I'm so grateful for that. Other than
What
that,
shows?
I
Can
have
you talk about some good shows you recommend?
well, The Diplomat. I absolutely love that show. There's been two seasons, I think.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it had a really good ending. Um,
yeah,
at the, and in fact, let me ask you this real quick too. I mean, again, you were writing a lot of, did you, you were writing a lot of more sitcoms. Like you said before, you thought you might be getting under like a cop show or whatever else. Like one
yeah,
thing, at least that I appreciate in terms of TV and movies that I kind of learned, um, that I try to at least apply to my own writing is that because with TV and especially movies, obviously things are very limited. Like you can't have every single scene. So there are times
right.
where they will maybe really compress a scene. Like I always use the Law and Order example where um, when the detectives go to interview a suspect or a witness, they're already in the middle of telling or of talking to the detective. Like,
Yes,
we don't have to see the detectives driving up to the
right.
apartment, going up the stairs, knocking on the door, introducing themselves, asking questions. It was like we're already in the middle of that conversation. And I feel like as the viewer, and then again, and a reader in terms of books, we already know what was asked. We don't have to see that. I mean, is that
Yeah.
something that you've found and that has been, kind of like I guess I don't know, like what are your thoughts, I guess, in terms of
Well, that one
that?
of the things I learned in television is start the story as late as possible
Mm.
and get out of there as soon as possible. You really want that middle chunk, and that those Law and Order scenes are a perfect example. They're always hilarious because they're talking to a guy who's like loading bread into a truck. He's always in the middle of his
Yeah,
job, and
I
they're
think John
bothering.
John Mulaney has a bit about
Oh,
that in his
does he?
stand-up. Yeah.
That's funny. So, but that's true in with all aspects, with the main story, with scenes. I mean, it was
Well,
often the case.
and I'm sorry, the
Yeah,
reason I brought that up is because in The Diplomat, I don't want to give any spoiler alerts for people who haven't seen The Diplomat
right.
yet, but season two has such a great ending. And it's one of
Yeah,
those things too where things are happening really quickly. And as the viewer, we're not really seeing it, but as we find out what happens, we understand what it is. You know what I mean? Like we don't have
yes,
to see it. We don't have to see these
yes,
events taking place. We're just seeing little snapshots that lead into different
yeah.
things.
And I mean, what I try to do in my writing is also what I love about other books or TV shows. It's the characters. Like the two, Carrie Russell and her husband, I think his name is Rufus Sewell. Like I could just watch them all, I could watch them drink tea for an hour. But they're just so good and good together. And then there's great storytelling on top of that. So that is really the show that most recently I that sucked me in. Um, Boy, before that, I think it was Succession, which I initially did not like. And then somebody said, it's a comedy. Just go back and rewatch it as a comedy. And then I'm like, okay, I'm in. Now I'm in.
Yeah, you know what? That's interesting. And I'm wondering because that has been kind of a trend where you'll have these comedy dramas. It's like,
Yeah.
like sometimes I forget what was recently, like it was nominated in a Golden Globe as a comedy or a drama. And it was like, what, wait, why is it in
Oh,
that
what
category?
was that
Like,
show?
when did that really start? I mean, maybe The Sopranos, because quite honestly, The Sopranos was a drama, but had a lot of comedy. There was a lot of comedic things that were happening in it.
Brilliantly funny, The Sopranos. And same with Breaking Bad. I remember when Breaking Bad was on, I thought this is the funniest show on television. No exceptions. That I'm a big believer that in real dramatic situations, one way we deal with it is levity. We'll find comedy. It doesn't mean we're being flippant or glib but but gallows humor is a real thing. And without it, I had tried to watch a show. I can't remember what it was called. Keira Knightley's in it. Uh,
On Netflix, Black Doves.
and it was so humorless, at least the episode I watched. I'm like, it just doesn't feel real to me. So it feels like it's even less stakesy. It's if there's no humor in it, because then I don't believe those are real people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Do you find though writing humor into fiction is more difficult? I mean, because I mean, this is probably a bad example, but I think about like some Stephen King novels where like
Right.
a character will say something to another character and then they just start laughing, like, knee slapping. And it's like, as the reader, I'm like,
No,
I
I
didn't
don't
even
think
smile. Like, I didn't find it funny.
I don't have them react to their own things. Um, the, I would never try to write that kind of humor. It should come off as funny to the reader, I hope. But if it doesn't, there's nothing embarrassing about it.
Mm,
I'm not putting something out there saying this is funny, you should be laughing. And having characters, and I love Stephen King, but having characters laugh at that kind of stuff, uh, unless it's meant to show like a camaraderie or a bond, or shared history. I would rather just have people like on The Sopranos, just the way they talk to each other, uh, especially when they're in their clubhouse atmosphere. It's just funny. They don't
yeah,
know how funny they are, which is the way it should be.
yeah. And I don't know if just going back, if it was a thing that I heard Larry David say, but like a lot of these comedies, like, you're like, there's these sitcoms where people are in these ridiculous situations. saying these ridiculous things, but then the other characters are not even reacting.
Right.
They're not laughing. So like on Curb Your Enthusiasm, if Jeff says something like
Right.
ridiculous, Larry will laugh because it's like that's natural. Whereas
Yes.
opposed to most sitcoms, when a character says something ridiculous or something very funny, everyone else just
N-
doesn't react.
I know. So they're kind of in an alternate reality. But um, yeah, that's a good point.
Or I mean,
But
on
that's
the
where
flip side,
you
because I just saw there's always reruns everywhere. Like I remember this rerun of Friends where the one character is aware of something the other characters are not, and then the character says something that the other characters don't understand is funny because
right.
they're not in on that joke, but the audience
Yes.
is. So I mean, like that kind of works that way, where like the characters, would not react in real life because they're not aware of whatever else,
Right.
whereas opposed to, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That was just something that just crossed my mind right now.
Yeah. But there are certain chapters that are kind of definitely work on a comedic level. Especially in my book, Carolina Moonset, there's two adults who kind of get railroaded into a first date by their elderly parents, and their conversation, I hear from people all the time how funny they think that is. Um, but they're also in an awkward situation. They're like they got kind of tricked into going on a date together, and they're on vacation for a week visiting their retired parents. Like what could happen in a week? So they just talk about it in a very realistic way, which really the premise of that thing is let's just tell each other the absolutely worst things about each other up front. And if we want to spend any more of the week with each other, we can, rather than like showing ourselves the best part of each other, which is gonna crumble as soon as we get to actually know each other.
Right.
So that's an example of like a comedic scene in one of my books.
Yeah. Yeah. So, is there anything you've been reading recently that you've been enjoying?
You know, I had never read John Le Carre before the pandemic, and now I just cannot get enough of his writing. Um, so I had just finished another Kate Atkinson book, and a writer named Ken Bruin just passed away, an Irish
Yeah.
writer. So I went back. I'd never read him. I read The Guards, especially because I just was in Galway. So, and I loved that book. But on this, there was I read a couple of just more brilliant Le Carre books. I just find his writing to be so literary, and yet the books are so genre. And
Yeah.
so I like that combination.
Well, going back to what you mentioned before, the very first book you had written is more literary, and then going back with crime. I mean, you find that a lot of quote unquote literary works usually center around a crime. There's like a
Oh,
death, and a death has happened. I mean, look at freaking No Country for Old Men. I
oh
mean,
yeah.
it's considered quote unquote literary, but it's a straight up crime thriller.
Well, I'm a big Donna Tartt fan, and both A Secret History and The Goldfinch are crime books from page one. They are. They have a ton of literary merit, but they are crime books.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure there's somebody out there who would argue otherwise, but
I mean, the nasty secret is honestly, it's just a publishing thing. It's just like, well, we
yeah,
have to stick a label on this. The booksellers have to place it on a certain shelf.
yes,
So, but I mean, oftentimes
agreed.
there are a lot of different books that can really straddle different genres. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
So, all right, real quick, because I think our time is very limited. So, have so when did you stop doing stand up? Or like, do you ever feel now, or do you still do stand up, or do you ever feel the bug where you're like, I would like to get up in front of people again and do some stand up?
Well, I do a lot of book events. I get asked to do quite a few of them. And so I'm not super jokey up there, but I do talk in front of groups quite a bit. I do wonder about knowing what I know now about character and persona. Uh, doing stand up again, and maybe someday I will. I don't know, but I'm really so busy and happily so writing books that it doesn't. The, that's a big turn, and I don't know if I can stay up that late
Yeah.
anymore to
No,
do
of
stand
course.
up. Yeah.
So did you, when you like, is any of your stuff online? Like, like old stuff that had been, on video back
No,
at like
thank God.
Bestseller or Caroline's or anything
No,
like that?
no, none of it's on. I mean, I never did stand up in New York. I did it a lot in Los Angeles. So, but no, and I'm thankful for that. I stopped doing it when I was 27 years old, I think, is the
Do
last
you
time I did
watch
it.
stand up now? Like, like the same thing.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a few
can you
people.
enjoy other stand up comedians stand up?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a little more particular than some people might be,
Yeah.
but there's some stand-ups out there who I just adore. Nate Bargatze is one of them. I just am so wowed by him. I, I mean, it's a subjective thing whether a person likes to stand up, but for me, he's one of the greatest of my lifetime.
Yeah,
You know.
no, he's great. But I think what also helps with his is just the delivery. That very
Oh,
dry. Um,
it is with all of the great stand-ups. If you had written up their acts, you would go, "What is this? What this isn't funny. This
yeah,
is," uh, and that's true. The very first Seinfeld scripts before it had ever been a show on the air, you would read those and they didn't read that funny because they
yeah,
were all attitude. They weren't jokey. They were character and attitude. And I just think that's true of the stand-ups too. If you usually, not always, but usually those bits are funny because that particular stand-up is saying it.
yeah. So, last question about stand up.
Yeah.
What was your routine typically like? Was it more just straight jokes or was it kind of like that, like some stand ups, it's more conversational about a story.
It was a
Um,
little more conversational. I mean, but it wasn't like Mitch Hedberg, like a joke, then next joke, then next joke. I started doing it when I was 21. I looked 15 back then. I did a lot of jokes about childhood. Um, so social observation kind of things. That's what it was. I did it for 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, and that's it's rare that someone really breaks through and finds their voice before that. So
yeah,
as a stand-up, it takes time. It takes time on stage. It
yeah.
takes a lot of bad sets, a lot of uncomfortable moments to get through.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
mean, I think a lot of people see these, quote unquote, overnight success comedians, and it's like, no, they've been working at it for
Yeah.
years and years and years. So I'm
Years and
assuming then
years.
when you do book events, there's really no nervousness then getting up in front of crowds.
No, and I was a very shy person. Stand up more than any, it taught me how to write a joke, but it also taught me how to face scary situations. And really, to this day, nothing's more scary to me than I don't think I'd be afraid now, but having gone through where I started, being so reserved and being able to get up in front of people, pretty much nothing intimidates me anymore.
Yeah, it's
Um,
good. So,
yeah,
all right, Matt,
yeah,
I appreciate your time. The new book, which comes out next week, next Tuesday, is called The Murder
yes.
Show. You want to hold it up real quick for people to see again what that looks like?
Here it is. It's available in hardcover and trade paperback.
Hardcover
With
and trade paperback, and obviously
yes,
ebook and audiobook. If people want
yes.
to stalk you online, where can they find you?
My website is mattgoldman.com. I also have a presence on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, perfect. So, Matt, again, thank you so much for hanging out. Everybody go check out Matt's new book and all his books. And if you can maybe get in a time machine, you can go back and see him do some stand up. So, all right. So we see
Thank
you
you,
next time.
Robert.
Bye.